why we do these talks is yes, to get it out there, but to educate you so that you know what to look for when you see something that's not right. So I have a few statistics about human trafficking, and then we'll kind of get into what human trafficking actually is. There's a lot in the media that's put out there. There's a lot of movies about what human trafficking is. People have seen Taken, the movie, yes? That's true. That kind of stuff does happen, but that's not your daily human trafficking. So we'll get into that. So human trafficking is the trade of humans for the purpose of forced labor, sexual slavery, or commercial sexual exploitation for the trafficker or others. So it's essentially slavery, right? But it is much easier to do today. You know, when you think of slavery, we think back to our history and people being purchased for money. Well, that's what's happening today, but it's happening much faster. And thanks to the internet for many things, we wouldn't be here as a society where we are today, but it has made human trafficking much more prevalent, much easier, and made the victims much easier to find. So it's estimated that there's 20 to 40 million people in the world that are in some sort of slavery today. And that earns about $150 billion a year for the traffickers across the world. So if you break that down, that's about $4,700 every second that a trafficker is making around the world off of someone else that is in a situation that they don't want to be in. 50,000 people are being trafficked annually into the U.S. from Mexico and the Philippines are the biggest. So without getting into all the political immigration stuff, yes, it does happen at our borders. People are being trafficked in, people are being taken advantage of, and once they get into the country, because they have not come in through legitimate means, it's very hard to track who they are, where they are, and what's happening to them. And that includes their family back in Mexico or the Philippines that now knows that they're in the U.S. but has no way to find out where they're at. The only times that these tend to get noticed is when law enforcement gets involved. And that's unfortunately a lot of times when we deal with a dead body of someone that's is a illegal alien, and also when they get into the criminal justice system. And then we start dealing with them that way. Now, that part isn't so prevalent up here in the north, but it is very prevalent in the south. And unfortunately, the most vulnerable for trafficking are 12 to 14-year-old girls, and specifically ones that have had previously been sexually assaulted. So if they've already been victimized, they tend to be more closely tied to their offenders. They are more sexualized, and they tend to grab onto them and allow them to do what they want with them because they don't want to go back to the situation that they were in. So it's a sad state of affairs, the human trafficking, and one, like I alluded to begin with, one part that I don't care for is that the media makes it that it is a bunch of these dark, masked people that do things to young people, that is what human trafficking is most of the time. Most of the time, human trafficking, we'll talk about the levels of human trafficking. So a lot of times human trafficking is done on a person-to-person basis. You have a pimp or a boyfriend, or it's typically a male doing it to a female, and they will manipulate them through drugs, through financial means, through abuse, and they will then pimp out that female as they travel the country to make money, to do whatever they want to do. It's usually, if you look at the vast majority, it's usually not a vast criminal enterprise that you're looking at. It's typically a one-on-one, one-on-two, something of that matter. They don't stay in places very long, so they're very difficult to track. You know, one thing that we're talking about doing now is using technology and finding the IP addresses and cell phone numbers and specific identifiers that people are using to post the ads on the internet. And then we can try and start tracking them across the country as they move. But typically, they don't stay in one place very long. So one other part where we're talking a lot about sexual slavery and human trafficking, but one thing that we need to know is there is a lot of labor trafficking as well, and there's a crossover. So I'll give you an example. What we've had here in town, a lot of you may have remembered our Asian massage parlors that we've had here in town. A lot of heads nodding. It's something interesting to be known for. So we've had 5 or 6 massage parlors try and move into Johnston. We've had some that did move in, and that's where we started getting our education about human trafficking. So we would go in, we knew that they were operating at, and this is also for you to know that if you see these types of things, it's what we call a clue, that they're operating at 10 o'clock at night for a massage business. Or at 3 o'clock in the morning, lights are on in the basement or in the back rooms of these places where they make the massage therapists or masseuses, they're not licensed massage therapists, but masseuses sleep in the back because it's cheaper. We're starting to notice that it was all male clientele. And typically it was male clientele with either out-of-state plates or out-of-county plates. So once this information got to us from the public, we started investigating it. That was our first initiation into how difficult it is to investigate and to get people that are being trafficked to be victims. Because typically their view of law enforcement is not positive, and what's going to happen to them is not positive, and where they came from is not positive. But where they're at now, they're safe, they're making money that they can send back to their family, granted not a lot, but to them, the evil that they know is much better than the evil that they don't know. So when we started engaging, even going in and just having a conversation with the therapist, we would always run into the same lady. And they're set up much like the human trafficking groups will be set up. There will be a person there's no kids in here, right? So there's vernacular that you use with this that you can't really get around, and you should know the vernacular for it. So there's something that's called the bottom bitch, and she's the one that runs the massage parlor, or she runs the group of girls. And she's the one that is the enforcer. While the male may be the pimp, and he may beat her, all that kind of stuff. Hey, that's my mother-in-law. So while she may beat her, they may beat her, she's the one that makes the connection with the female that's there. And she's the one that gets the information and supplies it to the male, the one that gives her the dope, the one that keeps her on the hook, while the male will typically run the businesses overall. And that's similar to what we saw here in town with our massage parlors. So we'd always talk to the same lady. We'd always get the same answer. Oh, I don't speak English, but you can talk to this person. We talked to a person on the phone. They said, yep, we'll call you back. We never heard from them. So we started pulling cars over that were leaving the massage parlor. It was always men. Surprisingly, they didn't want to tell us what was happening. They were very quiet about what went on in there, and everybody just says, oh yeah, got a massage. Well, how was it? It was okay. Yeah, they all were okay. And so finally, time and time again, we were finding this was happening. So we got enough that we could go in and get a search warrant based on some other information that we got. We got in there, and what we found was very typical of what you'd find in a larger city, what we thought would be in a larger city for a massage parlor. We found a lot of lotion, a lot of condoms, a lot of cash, not very many credit card receipts. And then we found stuff that was directly related to human trafficking. We found money orders, we found cots, we found sleeping bags in the basement, luggage, that kind of thing. And so we didn't know at that point much about human trafficking. To us at that point, it was a prostitution case. And we knew it was bigger because the same person was trucking them there every day. And the same people were the ones answering the phone. The same people came back to the people that had the phone numbers that were registered to that business, that were on the lease. And so we brought the ladies in because when we went in, we did catch them in some sex acts. And we started having a conversation with them, and they didn't want to be victims. We tried, we brought in the FBI has a victim specialist that you can bring in specifically for human trafficking. Even here in Des Moines, they have that, and they didn't want it. What we found out later was that they knew as soon as, in Iowa, it's a misdemeanor for prostitution. So we charge them with prostitution. We also charge the other ones with performing a massage without a license. In an attempt to just get the place shut down, to stop what was happening. And in having conversation with them, they actually came from Chicago. And what was happening is the lady that owned the massage parlor here in town also owned the one in Indianola, and also owned several other ones throughout Iowa. And what she would do is, when she was going to open up a massage parlor, she would call, what we would figure out later was a clearinghouse for Asian women in Chicago. And she would call and say, hey, I need women that will work for this, and for this dollar amount. And then she would say, and I'll supply the bus ticket. So she puts the money up for the bus ticket, they hop on the bus, they come here, now they're working for her. They have no other connection to Iowa. They have no other support here. They have no place to live. So we started seeing the cots and such in the massage parlor. Well, the ladies didn't want to stay there, so she ended up renting a house for them in the Drake neighborhood. And then she started putting the ladies up in the Drake. So then they had to pay for the food. She purchased the food for them. They had to pay for the water there. They had to pay, obviously, rent. Then they had to pay for laundry, all of that stuff. So by the time they got done, it was a very small amount of money that they were actually earning. And they had to pay for the table and such at the massage parlor. What we found in the basement were all these Western Union receipts. So they're actually taking the small amount of money that they're making here because they came to the country to better their family, they know that they could send money back to their family so their family could survive, in this case in China. And so they were able to Western Union or MoneyGram money back, but it was a very small amount of money. It was all they had. And so essentially these ladies were stuck in this lifestyle, trying to support their family back there with no other way out. They had no support systems. And they were threatened and all that kind of stuff physically as well. So we did what we thought we were supposed to do with this case at that time of charging them criminally. The next day they packed up and we got word when they were about at Iowa City that they were headed out back to Chicago. Within 2 weeks, the place was reopened, new ladies, new name, and they were back in business. So they equate the people to the criminal activity to drug trafficking, except it's much more profitable. Because if I am dealing drugs to you, I get the drugs from my dealer, this is my dealer, and I take them and I give them to you. Now I'm done, that transaction's over. My product is gone. But if I have a person that I can use again and again and again, 15 to 20 times per day, that they're requiring them to do some sort of sex act, I can use that person until they're no longer usable. And that's what this lady was doing. Those people were still usable. She just shipped them to another place that she had. Or she'll call and get more to come back. And so they're using people as commodities. And it was eye-opening for a community of our size to think that that was actually happening here. So we took a different approach here in Johnston after the third time that it happened. Another group moved in after we got that group finally moved out, and then we fought them the same way, and that one was involved in some narcotics activity. So we had to take a different approach. And for us here in Johnston, the approach that we decided to take was to place an ordinance in effect that any massage therapist had to register with the city. Now, the licensed massage therapists here in town that were legitimate did not like that, and I don't blame them. But unfortunately, we had to take a step to make sure that the people that were not legitimate had to go through a process, because once they got in there, we knew it was very difficult to get them out. at one point, we had to send our officers in there to get the massages to be able to prove the criminal activity. Well, as you imagine, the county attorney and the officers and their wives don't really appreciate that. And so we had to do something different. We had to think different. And for us, it ended up working out because now anytime a massage therapist wants to come into town, you have to come in, they pay a fee, it's not a big fee. And we run through and see if they have had any issues before, if they have any criminal activity in their background. If they don't, great, then we move on to the next step. We make sure they're licensed, we make sure they're insured here in town. And once we started doing that, since then, we've had 3 or 4 try to move in, and we've been able to stop every one of them from moving into town. That word got out, and now other towns around Iowa have the same ordinance that we do, nearly word for word. And I'll travel around at times and have these types of talks with a group of massage therapists that are upset that they're going to be feed for having the license inside the city. And then we started getting calls from outside the state. And so now, even in Florida, got calls from Texas, got calls from the coast, all the states surrounding us, that they're starting to do the same thing. So just to give you an idea, is that it does happen here. It's not something that just happens in big cities. I helped Newton not too long ago finally get rid of theirs. They were having the same issues there, and now they have our ordinance as well. When I do these talks, typically I want your feedback. So if you have questions or you disagree with anything or how we do it, or you have questions about how we go about it, I'm happy to answer those and get into the specifics.
So what happens to the kids when they've been here for X amount of time, right? You said they kind of get used up and gone. Yeah. Homeless somewhere else, transplanted out of state?
Well, I mean, for us it was older ladies that were in our massage parlor, but when we have kids, they end up in the system, unfortunately. Okay. Now there are places here in Des Moines and surrounding in Iowa that take human trafficking victims specifically, and they're ran by human trafficking survivors, which is actually what you're supposed to call them now, is survivors. And they do a great job. They try and get through to them and kind of change how they view things, because at some point sex becomes, we talk about people becoming a commodity. To them, sex becomes a commodity, sex becomes work. And so kind of changing that mindset of how they view the world and how they view others and how they view sex is difficult. But they try and work through that and then get them blended back into the life that they want, whatever that may be. Other questions about that? Questions about the victims? I mean, that's really at the core of this is we may have 20 million, 40 million people that are being trafficked, but what do we do with them? I mean, unfortunately, and they'll tell you this, I talked to some of them, I've sat on panels with them, they're damaged. They just don't see things the same way. And so for them to change that viewpoint and be able to be a productive member of society and not get into another abusive relationship or not get into drugs, that's a big issue with them, is trying to escape what's happened. We end up then with the homelessness. We then end up with prostitution even on their own because that's what they know.
Are you guys slower to slap like a prostitution label on people now, being more careful and cautious to ask more questions before you do that? Do you find that allows them to open up a little more, or do you?
Yeah, I don't. In dealing with them individually, the label has not been the issue. You know, yes, we try and not label them prostitutes and such, but the issue has been providing them some sort of hope, a way out that they can see as a legitimate way out. A lot of them are drug addicts, and their source is the pimp or the person that's selling them. So how do we as law enforcement, how do advocates work to find a way for that person to see that they're going to be able to survive this, especially with the heroin crisis that we have, right? I mean, they need a fix. And if they're not going to get it, they get violent, they get nervous, they get anxious, and they want out of there. So, yes, and I actually talk about that a little bit in my notes here, and I'll just skip to it, is if you do see something, is call us. If something's not right, if something looks like it's not right, and you know what looks like not right. But a lot of people are scared because they don't want to cause trouble, or they don't want to bother the police if it's nothing, or, it's not my place. Well, it's all of our places. Because unfortunately, the victim can't do it for themselves at this point. To have a dialogue with them, whether it's the officer who doesn't view it or the victim, one of them is not going to be able to have the dialogue that person needs a way out. And so when you call in, when you see something that's not right, call us. And if you do, say, hey, I'm concerned that person's being human trafficked, as opposed to, there's a lot of activity next door to my hotel room, and I just see guys coming in and out. I know it's funny, but from a patrol officer perspective, they deal with so many things again and again and again and again that what cues up in your mind, oh, got another prostitute, right? And so if you say those things, even as you're calling in that, hey, I'm concerned about this, it puts it in that officer's mind that, hey, there might be something more going on here. Or ask if it's an ongoing issue in your neighborhood, or if you work someplace like a truck stop or someplace that has a lot of transient activity, is ask for a supervisor, ask for a detective to come talk to you. What we've failed at in law enforcement is we've done a whole bunch of training on this type of stuff, but we've trained the supervisors or we've trained the detectives. And what we've gone back to the state and said is we need to come back and train the guys in the street that are driving the cars that are going to these calls and are having conversations with these people. I can tell you, I was sitting there writing this today, and this is the first time I've done a talk like this. Usually it's a panel or something like that, or a group that's getting together that wants to do something about human trafficking. And in writing this, I was thinking back, and I can think specifically of a stop. Knowing what I know now, there's a lady, and today I tried to find her on Facebook, see if she's still out there, if she's still alive. She was being trafficked. I did the traffic stop. I looked through the car, found a bunch of pornography, a bunch of sex toys, all kinds of things that indicate that there's some sort of human trafficking going on here. There was a male that pulled up in the car behind. Something was going on here. But at the time, it didn't click to me. I didn't have the education. I didn't know that this was something in the world that happened. And, thinking about her responses and his responses and him trying to take control of the conversation and all of that happened that day, I should have done something different, but I just didn't know any better. And that's the problem with the officers that we have on the street. Great guys want to do the best that they can, but the issue is they just don't know. And so we're working now with the state to try and provide more of that training specifically to our officers that get out there and grind every day and talk to people. But having these conversations as well with the public so that you know what to look for is important. So we talked about something not looking right. Obviously physical abuse, or the past physical abuse, the black eyes, the scars, the bruises, bruises specifically on the arms, that kind of thing that you can see where they're being grabbed, pulled, yanked, those kind of things. Close proximity to another person for a long period of time and limited freedom of movement. So those guys or the gal that's in charge, if they go into a truck stop, they're right next to them. I mean, if we're walking around, they're right here with them, and they're not letting them have freedom of movement. If they go to the bathroom and say it's a one-stall bathroom, they're right outside. We've seen that before where they don't want to give them an inch because they think they're going to take off. Over-sexualized behavior for youths. And that also goes for youth being sexually assaulted, is any of that sexual behavior that wouldn't be normal for that age, that they wouldn't normally know that or be interested in that, that's a red flag for anyone, human trafficking, sexual assault, whatever. That's something that should be looked into. If they're withdrawn, depressed, and distant. So we talked about them following them around, and a lot of times they get that almost like all the time heroin high. And if you may not know what a heroin high is, but it's like a 1,000-yard stare. There's nothing going on with them. They're lethargic in movement. You can have a conversation right to them. They'll just like stare right through you. So they get that way over time, especially those that have been in it over time, because that's how they kill the emotion of everything. That's how they survive where they're at. And so noticing that in them and then compiling it with these other cues should be something where you said, I'm just going to call the police to just give them a heads up. Substance abuse issues, fearful of police and authorities. Specifically, if you see something and you say to that person, well, I'm going to call the police, and they freak out about it, that should be a cue that something's not right. You know, now in some of the come and goes, they have stickers in the bathrooms right in the corner of the mirrors that say, if you need help, call this number, and then it's a human trafficking number. That was one of the best things, and the people do use that number. I know there's a couple instances of people using that number and law enforcement then having to track the person from there, but tracking them down. So that was a great addition. But a lot of, other businesses that we've gone to and the state's gone to have not been so willing to be helpful.
So do these girls have phones though, or?
No, typically not. Most of their dates and meetings are set up through the bottom bitch lady that runs the situation, and they're not given that freedom. Honestly, most of them, I shouldn't say most, a lot of them are doped up a lot of the time. And so their ability to know what's going on, to break from that, it's not high.
That's why I wondered about those stickers, like, is that for like people like us to call, or?
You can call it as well, but
how do the people call those numbers?
well, they can get access to phones over time, but I think the idea is to put it out there, the number out there, so that at some point, if they can, they have that opportunity.
They're clear.
Yeah.
We go to a lot of large sporting events. We have season tickets to the Vikings. So I'm in the restroom, and I observe the closeness, or whatever. How can I intervene without putting the child in danger and get security there? I mean, that's a 5-minute experience that I have. But how can I help in that short of a time?
I'm sorry you're a Vikings fan.
I know that.
But how can you intervene? I mean, it's a difficult situation. What I would tell you is you need to find security. You need to find someone else that, and the Vikings security, I guarantee, has been trained in human trafficking, is to get them to wherever the situation is that's occurring and tell them what you saw, and then allow someone that's trained to intervene in it. Now, you putting yourself in between someone that's making a bunch of money off of someone is probably not going to end well. But finding, in the stadium, you can call 911.
Actually, they have signs posted all over. See something, say something, and they give you a number to text. But so a girl walks in. It's obvious she's either drunk or high. She goes into the restroom. Her companion is standing right outside that door. So what can I do? Am I gonna put myself in danger if I take a picture? I mean, what can I do that would be most helpful to security?
Pointing them out.
Because they're only going to be there 5 minutes.
Yep, pointing them out and telling them what you saw. and then letting them go from there. I wouldn't advocate anybody putting themselves in between a pimp or a boss lady and someone that they're making money off of, because it's not going to end well for you. And unless you have somebody trained there that can have a conversation with that person and ideally say the right things and have a back and forth with them to realize if it is human trafficking, more than likely the girl that you're seeing that's being abused or being watched is going to side with the person that's abusing her.
Yeah.
So then you are going to be the bad person. So provide the information that you have to security, to the authorities, whoever's there, and then let them investigate it and see what's up.
Do you all check out any of the nail salons that are in town as well? Because some of the things that you're pointing out, I've noticed sometimes I don't go regularly I see a few faces that I've seen before, but then everybody else is different. You can't help but notice their hands and their arms, and sometimes the girls have, bruises on their arms, which in their line of work could be explained away, I suppose, or the whole wanting cash instead of, being able to use your debit card or those types of things. So do you look into those places as well?
As complaints come in, yes.
Okay.
I'll just be very blunt with you. We have to be very difficult about investigating Asian nail salons or Asian massage parlors or whatever. So we look for the public to provide us complaints on those businesses. Again, that's why we do these talks. And so when you're sitting in there, you go, hey, somebody said something about this. What did they say to do? Call the police. And that's what initiated all of our massage therapy, our massage parlor investigations. And actually, another human trafficking incident that was related to that also came from an apartment complex here. It all comes typically from you making the complaint to us and us going say, it's not right, and then looking into it further. It's hard there's been a few traffic stops in which I can think of where there's been an instance where an officer's been able to do something with it, but typically it comes from you all. So other things that you can look for, you ask for ID, you say you're working at a place and you ask for ID and the person does not have identification. It's very unusual nowadays. Typically they'll take their ID from them and not allow them to have it. Cars with out-of-state plates, again, we talk, typically they're traveling with these girls. And rental cars, they use a lot of rental cars because they're very hard to track. They're scared of those that they're with. Another one, if you are at a big place for human trafficking and where we get, not we, but law enforcement get called a lot to, is the truck stops. So RVs, semis, vehicles with the windows that are covered up. Or one that parks in the lot and tends to stay there a couple days. They tend to go back to the same truck stops. Parks there a couple days. You just see one person getting in and out. You never see multiple people, but there's see one same person getting in and out and multiple people coming to that RV, to that semi, whatever it is. That is a very good indication that there's prostitution, probably human trafficking going on inside of there. Truck stops are one of the biggest issues, biggest hotspots for human trafficking. You were talking about sporting events. I wanted to hit on that. Actually, Catch Des Moines, you guys are familiar with them. It's the tourism arm, essentially, for the city of Des Moines and the greater Des Moines area. So they're the ones that help put on, like, NCAA tournament that comes here, that helps put on the wrestling, the boys state basketball, all that stuff. We do see, even the Iowa State Fair, you see a influx of human trafficking that comes in, or influx of prostitution, what appears to be prostitution coming in, which is really the veil for the human trafficking. So they're actually getting together, and I've sat with them a few times, and they're working to create a way to deal with that here in Iowa. But typically, when you go to any big sporting event, you mentioned NFL, that's a big one, but any place that you're going to see a lot of human trafficking going on. So that is a good time to look for those cues, the truck stops, at the gas stations, at the event itself, in the parking lot of the event, those places. You want to talk a little bit about what we do here when we get complaints and how we go about investigating that stuff and the communication that we want from the community?
Sure. First thing, Tyler here, and he's been doing most of the talking. It's mainly my job just to look cool. But Tyler won't tell you, but he is a great resource for this community. He's done a great job with the massage parlor ordinances, and he mentioned that we've gone, he's gone over to different cities and helped them with their ordinances. That's because he was spearheading it. So I want to give him a little credit. He won't take it probably, but I want to give him a little credit there. It comes back to, if you see something, say something. Part of that is, like he was saying, we get multiple complaints. That's a bigger red flag for us. Just saying, hey, we're seeing this going on. He's talked about people, in the same apartment complex talking about the same thing. Well, that gives us a red flag, and the patrol officer will come out, probably talk to you, maybe generate a report. Those reports go to our detectives, and the detectives, they kind of do the legwork on a lot of that stuff. So they will follow up either with the people in, say, the apartments, or if you have names or numbers or things like that. They can do the follow-up. If there's any previous contacts with law enforcement, then they reach out to just different agencies. Sometimes if they need help from the FBI or something like that, if it gets down that far, we can definitely put people in contact with those people, with resources, maybe providing ways out. And from there, it kind of is incumbent on us to keep following up on that. Is that kind of what you're looking for?
Yeah, I think when he's talking about our detectives following up, is a big part of that is that you get as much information as you can, and then we can go and take it from there. I did one of these at Grandview University a couple years ago with a survivor, and the lady came up afterwards and said, I'm seeing this at my apartment complex. She was in West Des Moines. Shot it over there, and there was some stuff going on that probably shouldn't have been going on. So you're seeing it. It's just if you're identifying it or not. It is pretty, unfortunately, pervasive in certain parts of our culture, that you're seeing this on a weekly basis, no doubt. But are you noticing it? It's happening. So from us at the department that want to do something, that want to stop this and want to work to make it so difficult that it's not worth it to these people, we ask you, beg you, to call us and let us know when you see something. And we're happy to go and look at it.
Have you talked to the authorities over there in Ankeny?
Yep.
Because they have a motel, I read in the paper, that there's a lot of trafficking going on.
Yeah.
It's not just one hotel.
Yeah, so hotels are obviously a good place for this as well. I will tell you that it takes time for these investigations. It took a year from when we did our first search warrant at the massage parlor in Merle Hay, almost exactly a year before we were able to get it shut down. It's not as easy as it sounds to investigate. So I know they are aware of it, and I know they're working on it.
So you said the average age of somebody being human trafficked is 12 to 14.
Average teenager.
Right. So how are these girls being procured?
All right. Social media. I mean, that's the easiest part. So here's what's happened over time, is that you used to have kids that were home no matter how much, their parents watched them, whatever. They were home at night. They were sleeping in their bed from 10 o'clock until they got up to go to school in the morning. That's how I grew up. That's how my friends grew up. But what's happening now is kids on their phone have access to the rest of the world. an inverse to that is the rest of the world have access to your kids. So from that 10 o'clock until the morning time, the rest of the world has access to your child depending on what platform they're on. That's how they're finding these kids. You have older men that are typically befriending young girls that aren't confident in themselves and building them up, and then they're able to get their hands on them in some manner. Typically it starts with them running away, young girls running away, or young boys. I've seen that too. And when the young girls run away, you can bet that there's a boy involved. When young boys run away, you can bet that they're just pissed off at something. Right? But when young girls run away, you can pretty much be sure that there's, in my history of doing it for the last 17, 18 years, typically there's a boy involved. And so with the kids having so much access to the rest of the world, that they're able to learn about things that they wouldn't have otherwise known years ago. So that's starting to happen. And what we're finding with the kids in high school, even in middle school, is when they're supposed to be sleeping, they're not. Kids nowadays are getting like 3 hours of sleep and going to school, if that. They're staying up all night on their phones, Snapchatting, Facebooking, whatever it is, communicating with each other. And so in doing that and being out there, they're finding these people that want to victimize them. If you go on to YouTube and you put in, pedophile hunter, you can hop on and you can see how fast it happens. People will put their camera on their screen, these pedophile hunter folks, which I don't endorse, but they're out there. And they will hop on, act like a 14-year-old girl. Within seconds, they're getting people hitting their page. And then within minutes of conversation, there's requests for sexual activity, for pictures, for naked pictures, for meetups, those kind of things. So it's very easy to make that contact with someone that's trying to offend, where it didn't used to be. Sure.
I've worked with schools a lot. I was a school resource officer. I supervised the school resource officers. And one of the biggest questions, you asked, what can I do in that 5-minute span? I mean, who in here has kids? Probably half the reason most of you are in here. That's where you can make the most difference, at least in my opinion, is you need to be monitoring your kids' social media. It's your phone. They might tell you it's theirs, but it's your phone. You need those passwords. You need not only the passwords to the phones, but you need the passwords to their apps too. You need to be checking those. Like Lieutenant Tompkins said, after 10 o'clock, these kids are staying up. They're communicating with other people. They're in their rooms. Take their phone. They don't need it after 10. And what my grandma always said, nothing ever good happened after what? Midnight? 10 o'clock? And it's true. They've got school the next day. There's nothing they need to be doing, unless it's working on a science project or something like that. But monitor those things. And it's not a one-time conversation. I bet all of you in here have told your kids at least once, stay off bad social media, don't talk to strangers, all that sort of stuff. Once isn't going to do it. You need to be on them all the time. They may hate it, but it's in their best interest because they have their phones every day. They get hit with it every day. I've worked with kids in the school who literally every day are getting requests for naked pictures from other students. And I mean, it's day after day after day after day. And that's hard to say no to. So, especially if it's all the time. So the biggest thing I can stress is you have contact with your kids every day, you need to be on them. And it can be a light conversation. It doesn't have to be fire and brimstone every single time. But you have to reinforce that I'll be checking your apps. I will be looking at your photos. They will try to find new ways to hide them. So educate yourself. That's one of the best things you can do is just go online. Hey, what are the new apps? People ask me, what are the new apps? What are the new things that are happening right now? I can give you a list, but in 6 months, half that stuff will be outdated. And I go into the middle schools, and when I give talks, I ask them, what are you guys doing now? And every year, there's 2 or 3 new apps that everybody's using that I had no idea about. And then I go on and I look at them. But those conversations do happen, like Lieutenant Tompkins said. That people will reach out. Do they have to tell them they're a 35-year-old man? No, they can say I'm a 14-year-old girl. And by the time they meet up, or they convince them to meet up, then it's too late. We can't do anything about it at that point, or it's a lot harder for us. So that's where I think you guys can make the biggest difference. And I guess the last thing, I don't know if you're going to hit on it, but sometimes I get people that say, why don't they just walk away? Why don't they just take off and leave? Part of the reason is they're close by, but I went to a lecture from a sex assault or a sex trafficking survivor, and she said these pimps will impregnate people and then sign as the father, and essentially use their kids as collateral. They won't have them aborted. They'll sign as the father and say, if you ever want to see your kids again, you're going to keep turning out for me. And just go back to think what you do for your kids. That's hard to walk away from. And if you do walk away, what's going to happen to my kids? So it's a lot more difficult, and that's what really got to me was it's a lot more difficult than just walking away sometimes. And I wanted to kind of push that a little bit because that's something that comes up a lot is, well, this is their fault. They're just there. They're not willing to walk away. And that's not quite it.
Yes.
I mean, what do you tell your child when they hear that maybe one of their friends might have pictures on a porn site or doing this or doing that? What do you have?
Tell your mom and dad, or tell your teacher, tell your SRO. I mean, we have SROs in all the schools. We're available to all the schools. They will come in and talk to the kids about that. They have training to talk to the kids about that. So that's something that they can't be afraid to do that. That's part of the reason we have SROs in the schools, is to build those relationships with the kids. Because I understand, some kids don't want to come to talk to a police officer. But being in the schools for a long time, I've had some troubled kids come up and say, look, I won't talk to cops, but I'll talk to you. That makes me feel good. But it's definitely something that they can go to. So encourage them to do that.
And what you were talking about the naked pictures on their phone, and it happens almost every day at the school. We deal with it in some manner.
She asked about if your child's friend is saying that they have naked pictures on the phone. Who do you go to talk to about that? And we want to know about that. It's essentially child pornography that's running around. We don't want that.
And if your child has it on their phone or was sent to them, the county attorney and us, as long as they're not requesting it, sending it out, distributing it, we're not in the business of charging children for having naked pictures on their phone. As long as, like I said, they're not doing something with them. We've had plenty of kids that didn't want to tell us that they had naked pictures on the phone because somebody sent it to them. But that may be a very key point for a case, for an exploitation case that we've had. We've had that happen a fair amount of times. So let them know you're not in any trouble if you have them on your phone. Don't do anything with them. Let someone know, and then we'll go from there. Other questions?
So I notice every once in a while on Facebook, I'll come across somebody who's been at like Walmart or Target, and they've been followed around in the store. Can you tell me a little bit about that? Is this like really a thing? Is it seeking attention? Because I'm hearing that that's part of what this is, or what goes on in this area related to that?
We laugh about those because our wives get them and then bring them up to us if it's real. We've never had in our town, we have not had an instance of that occurring that's been reported to us to the level that they are being reported on Facebook or wherever, Twitter. Nobody's slashing anybody's Achilles so that they can't run away. I mean, that may
Those
have.
are old ones,
Right.
I'm talking-
I can't
I
even
can't
fit
keep up
under-
with all of them.
This is more about, people like, they think they're gonna grab their children or, and that kind of stuff. Like, it's out there on Facebook all the time. Like, they're, even at the mall out here in, Jordan Creek, there was just one about a lady that two guys supposedly had grabbed her phone and was able to call her somehow, or not grabbed her phone, but got a signal to call her and was like watching her and all this stuff. This was just like yesterday. People saying, yeah, we saw the same guys and all this stuff. Like, is this real? Is it?
I don't know anything about that.
I don't know anything about that either. I would say anything you read on the internet, just take it with a big grain of salt.
But yeah, so it's not, we're not seeing
What I'm
these
thinking
types of
from it
things.
is like, I try to be conscious of my surroundings. That's just based upon some training that I've had with self-defense, but I forget sometimes to like really pay attention what's going on around me. And I think really that's probably one of the best things you can do is just, I
Be
guess,
aware.
be aware of your surroundings.
I had to report somebody, but I didn't think about it until the next day. A complete stranger came up to me at Fleet Farm there in Ankeny and asked me if I wanted to go with him and his wife to the Dominican Republic, to a resort. There's no Sandals Resort in the Dominican Republic.
Yeah, I mean, there's
Anyway,
weird
no.
things that happen, right? I mean,
Yeah.
but as far as it being pervasive as and outlandish that happens as what I've been shown on, obviously they don't get sent to
Yeah.
me, but when I see them, no, it's typically not what you're talking about. It's someone that has, I mean, there's sometimes people have mental health issues that they come and do things, one-off things, but it's typically not, we're not seeing people getting abducted in parking lots or whatever.
Okay, because that's kind of like, it's like fear mongering almost, or, but I didn't know, is it really fear mongering? Is it somebody trying to seek attention? Is it like, is this stuff happening? That's mainly my thing. Is
The first two
this
things you said,
happening? Okay.
that's what we see.
Because I don't want to be like.
That's like
scared
half of the
to
internet,
go
it
to
seems like,
Walmart or
people
something.
wanting attention.
Oh.
Other questions, anybody?
What number should we call for Johnston if you have one report?
Well, our non-emergency number is 278-2345. But if you can't remember that, just dial 911. I mean, it used to be, and I was told as a kid too, that if you dial 911 and it wasn't an emergency, you were in trouble. People dial 911 for all kinds of goofy things now. And nobody gets in trouble. It's if you abuse it, if somebody's continually dialing it. So if you can't remember the number, just dial 911. It's perfectly fine.
Do you have a campaign of like taking the real number, the other number, and having people present that to storefronts, to the owners of those businesses, so if they've got that information, I mean, maybe they already do, but continue to pass that stuff out so that there's awareness and other people can see it in those locations.
I mean, we try to have that conversation with them on a case-to-case basis, but there's a lot of different organizations out there. There's one specifically for truckers, educating them about, sex trafficking. I went to one, I think a year ago or so, and it was specifically for hotel operators. So there's a lot of that out there, and we're lucky enough in the Midwest that Creighton University is actually like the #1 place for research for sex trafficking. So a lot of that comes out of Creighton too. A lot of that training, that sort of stuff, a lot of the research. But so there's a lot of different organizations. Most of them are good. Usually they're vetted. They don't last very long if they're not good. And so that's kind of we're not necessarily directly involved, but we're aware of a lot of those different ones.
The problem being that there's a lot of people that want to do something, but there is not a tip to the spear where everybody's meeting and we're moving forward, right? Everybody wants to do something. I've sat on several of these different boards, panels, whatever. People want to do something. They sit here much like yourself. All right, we're going to move forward and go. And then everybody just kind of moves forward together, but there does not appear to be any main focus of we're going to hit this. So that is what slows a lot of this down. There are some groups that are trying to head it up and other groups that are trying to head it up. And that just makes it difficult. So that's what's slowing us down. We're trying to get past that as a law enforcement group, but we have not yet. Any other questions? Well, thank you guys for coming out. We appreciate you coming out and hearing us. And again, please call. We'd love to hear from you if you do see something. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you.